feeling this video is going to get pretty steamy. And I am making this video in response to a little short clip, no longer than 15 seconds, that I posted the other day with a woman receiving a thorough BDSM spanking. And I am relieved, I am very satisfied to see that the majority of y'all get it. Okay, the majority of y'all understand what was happening in that video. I would say a good 85% of y'all actually get it. But then the remaining seem to be a bit confused. And through that confusion, you guys have been leaving your comments on that video. You guys have been casting judgment. You guys have been making statements that don't quite align with the truth, right? So I want to bring this video to you guys to clarify some things, especially 3 most common misconceptions as it relates to BDSM spankings. Let's clear the air, okay? And in this video, I will be speaking from my personal experience, number one. So I'm not just coming on here giving you guys some shit that's out my ass, right? Or some hearsay, whatever, right? It's me speaking from personal experience. Also, me speaking from my professional experience as a psychologist, right? A person who studies human behavior in and out. This is not my first video on this topic, by the way, for you guys who are newcomers to this blog channel. For those who are newcomers to my Facebook page, Danny's World, I actually have a whole collection, a whole series of videos I've made on alternative sexual lifestyles. I have a whole series on YouTube entitled BDSM, just by itself, right? Related to BDSM. I have a whole series entitled Cuckolding. So you guys check that out. I have a whole series just on relationships, right? So I talk about these things from a psychological perspective. Sometimes I go deep, as I will here in this video, peeling back the psychoanalytic aspects of human behavior and what drives us, such as myself, right, to these seemingly bizarre types of behaviors, such as BDSM spankings. And I feel like, that's kind of mild in comparison to the whole gamut. When we begin to explore like the whole gamut of a variety of different types of activities, right, and things that people engage in who are not necessarily a part of the vanilla flavor of things, right? Now, we'll be using some terminology. I know some of you guys are new. You're new to this. You're like, what? What is vanilla, right? So basically, there are 2 sides to the coin, right? There are those who I would say is the majority of you guys who ascribe to the vanilla style relationships. That's your typical regular type of relationships, right? As it relates to sexual activities, right? You just interested in the basic kind of intercourse, nothing outside of the ordinary, so to speak, right? I find that interesting. So even as I'm doing this video, it's just like, it's interesting how we define what's common, what's normal, what's ordinary. Sometimes I experience my own cognitive dissonance, as you guys have watching that short video clip, because it's just like, who's to say? Who's to say that BDSM spankings are abnormal, right? And what does that actually mean? I think for a lot of people who are watching this video, some of y'all are honest enough to admit that you yourself have some proclivities towards things that you may not feel comfortable speaking about, right, openly in front of the public, especially on public platforms such as this. And then there are those who do. For me, as a sex positive person, as a sex positive psychologist, like I'm all about promoting sexual freedom, sexual expression, just being able to stand boldly and firmly in who you are. And sexual identity is only one aspect of a person's identity, right? I come on here very unapologetically, right, as it relates to many different facets of our existence as human beings, right, or spiritual beings. And so when I come on here and talk about sexuality, right, that's only one aspect of it, right? But to say the least, I think that it is in our best interest that we come to an understanding of something, and then we go and make an informed decision based on that complete understanding. So hopefully this video will help you guys provide some clarity, some understanding as it relates to BDSM spanking. So let's just jump right in. As I said, I will be speaking from personal experience. I will be speaking from my professional knowledge as a clinical psychologist. So the first. Now, the first misconception that I get a lot, and this is difficult, I think, for me, because as a person who is really deeply involved in the lifestyle, right? Like, this is who I am. It's not just like something I do, right? And I have to begin this video by saying also that there are people who identify themselves, for example, as submissive. There are people who identify themselves as dominant. There are people who are switches, right? So it is a continuum. For myself, I identify myself as a submissive. I guess you could say a masochist, right? Or what is a masochist? A person who derives pleasure from pain. And that was a term that was mentioned in the comment section of that video. Someone says, what in the state of masochism is going on here, right? And within those constructs, right, of dominance and submission, right, it is an interplay. It is a power exchange. And we're going to talk about what does that mean? What does that actually look like, right? And the power exchange, how it actually is a motivating factor that drives this proclivity, that drives these behaviors, right? That drives a person's desire to be in a dominant role, right? Or in a submissive role. Within that, though, within the dominant submissive dynamic in a relationship, it could play out in terms of the bedroom setting, right? So it's limited to a specific time, specific place, or it can also play out day to day, right? In daily activities 24/7, or it can be a combination of both. Now, for myself, I identify myself as a 24/7, right? I enjoy this type of relationship dynamic 24/7. That's just me. And I think for me, with that particular type of preference, I do think that it also contributes to the reason why I have a difficult time on the dating scene. Because like this whole thing is here is like, it's very dynamic, right? It's very intricately woven, that is not just as cut and dry. It's not as black and white as people will maybe like to believe, right? So we're talking about this interplay, this power exchange, this relationship dynamic that really takes place in the context of our society in which we live in, right? We don't live in a vacuum. We all are impacted by many different systems that lie outside of us. And so we look at the context of our society in today's time, right, in 2024, there is a push for men to become more effeminate, more emasculated. And some of y'all watching this, some of y'all men would like to believe, right, that you are a man, would like to believe that you are a real man, a natural man, right? But even that term, manhood, what is that? what defines a man? What defines a woman? What does that actually look like? How can one break that down if you were to operationalize those terms, right? I know for myself, I'm attracted to alpha men, fully alpha dominant men. Those are men who take the lead in relationships, not just in their personal life, but all the way around, right? And so I find it interesting when I'm not really in a closet about who I am, my sexuality, my sexual preferences, my sexual identity, right? It is what it is. And, that term comes up, right? BDSM comes up on my social media platform, definitely on my dating profile. And I find it interesting that the number one thing that usually comes up, right? The number one kind of reaction is that men somehow think I am a freak. I've even been called that, right? By men on dating sites. It's like, oh, you a freak. Just based on seeing these four letters, right, that make up the acronym BDSM. And I'm initially offended, right? But I have to remind myself that people speak from their own understanding or lack thereof. And so this is also the reason why I'm doing this video, to make things clear for those who identify themselves, with this lifestyle. You can also add your own understanding, your own experience, and knowledge here in this video, right? In the conversation side of this video, in the comment section, right? And we can just engage in a real, very mature, back and forth conversation related to this topic. And I'm offended because it's just like, number one, I feel misunderstood. And that's a big one for me. It's just like, how can we move forward and getting to know each other if you don't even understand me, right? And then not on top of that, but you're judging, you're casting judgment on who I am. This is not something I just do. This is something who I am. This makes up who I am as a person on so many different levels, right? And they're like, oh, you're a freak. They automatically think that, I'm promiscuous, that I just want to fuck, I just want to, have these things done to me, and automatically shut them out. Automatically, like they're out of the runnings, automatically, just based on that, because I'm turned off, number one, right? And I think it's important to understand, like I said, what drives a person's interest in this. It's really psychological, right? Yes, we see the video, we see the spanking, right? A lot of people automatically, obviously it's associated with sex, right? And they think, oh, sex, freakish behavior, this is porn. When you Google BDSM, what comes up often is porn videos. So I think people are disillusioned and they're misguided to think that that's just what it is. That's the totality of what it is. When really, yes, it is a sexual energy exchange, but sexual energy exchange happens on many different levels, deeper than just physical sex. You have to really have an appreciation for understanding what motivates human behavior, such as myself, to really appreciate this dynamic, right, in the DS relationship. I guess I can speak from my own personal experience and interest as a submissive. For me, nothing turns me on more than a man who knows how to take the lead, and this is not just only in the bedroom. Because there are men, which they call bedroom doms, so to speak, who only know how to dominate in the bedroom. And I question, like, is that really real domination? Because if that's the only sphere in which you know how to dominate a woman, like, are you really a true dominant? I don't see those as real doms. They're bedroom doms, right? And that's a lot of men. Right? They know how to be a little bit forceful, right? They know how to obviously take the lead in the sense that, they may pull a woman's panties down. They may initiate the actual sexual activity in terms of foreplay and kissing and touching, and disrobing a woman, right? And being on top, being the top in that sexual dynamic experience. But then once the sex is over, then they go back to being your typical, and I say typical, I mean in these times that we live in now, typical vanilla man. Those men oftentimes show up as men who want to go 50-50 in relation. Now, listen, that's a whole other topic, but it is somewhat related, right? So when we're talking about true doms, and for those who get it, I appreciate you. Thank you. I felt so relieved. I felt so seen and reassured by those people who were in the comment section, and they automatically understood it, right? They got it. Just no explanation needed. This is for those, clearly, like I said before, who don't get it, right? But yeah, a real dom, a real man. And it's sad that we have to even develop these constructs of dom and submission when really these are something that is like primal human nature. This is something that really should come natural and has historically. But again, like I said, in the context of what's happening in our society, right? The shifts, the socio-political shifts that are happening. For example, with the women's rights movement, with the Me Too movement, people undermine the impact of those two things or, these things at large. But in a sense, like it really has shaped us. And I've seen the progression. Mind you, despite what I look, right? I am actually a 40-year-old woman, so I have seen the progression, or should I say regression, of society, specifically men and women, and how they relate to each other. And I grew up, because I can speak, like I said, from my own personal experience. I grew up in a 2-parent household, a mother, a father. My father was definitely the head of the household. He took the lead. Not to say my mom didn't contribute to the financial aspects of the household, right? But it was clear who wore the pants in that relationship. Like, I even posted pictures of my mom and my father on my Facebook page, and I'm like, it's very clear. You can see it's very clear who wore the pants in that relationship, right? And so just coming from that, speaking from that frame of reference, right? And growing up in the 80s, like this is just something that was of the norm. And so seeing like how times have changed, seeing how these socio-political movements have made a detrimental impact on male-female relationships, right? I've experienced it just growing up, being an adolescent, being an adult, right? Stepping into my own sexuality and seeing how men related to me, let's say back in, was at the early 2000s when I actually became sexually active, right? Stepping into my sexuality. Men definitely were more assertive. They were more in their masculinity, their masculine energy, right? In a sense where it's like they knew a woman in and out, right? And it was less hesitancy and more of them being certain, them being sure, right? Them being comfortable, them just acting out of their natural expression as a man. But then, of course, you have these movements. It's not to undermine the seriousness of the Me Too, because women and men have been abused, right? And that abuse definitely comes with a set of traumas and negative, consequences that lingers, in a person's life. Some is irreversible, the damage that, their experience and being abused has caused. But at the same time, it's just like it has its negative consequences too, right? Like everything has a good side and a bad side. And I've seen the changes like in men. I've seen how the Me Too movement has impacted men. Men have become definitely more hesitant, less assertive, more effeminate. And I just see it, men are becoming more emasculated. You guys let me know what your take is on that. But to me, it gives a vibe that I'm not really responding well to. right? Because I know men, how men were before, and I know how men have become after, and it's just like, this is not my cup of tea. I've made videos talking about my experiences and just how I have been turned off and dating men who, for every little thing, right, every little gesture, they have to feel that they have to ask permission. This was like right around the time with the Me Too, when Me Too was really big. They're just like, oh, can I touch your leg? Oh, can I touch your hair? Like every little thing, they're asking permission. I'm like, do you not know? That to me is a turnoff. Like, I feel like it takes away from the organic aspect of relating to each other. Like, organically, we read body language, right? Organically, a person can read the energy of their partner, right? And then you just know. It's not to say that, okay, you take away the actual verbal consent, because I feel like, consent could be implied. That's just me, right? And consent can be implied. And if you're unsure, of course, then you clearly directly just ask, right? But I just like to appreciate and reminisce. Fortunately, this is a reminiscence, because it's just like it's non-existent now. Where there were the times where, just men and women just could be, right? And if they were in a physical space and time with each other, well, obviously there was trust established, right? And understanding established, that they can just enjoy each other's company in whatever way that looked like, without the backdrop and the fears. This is the issue, right? Like the fears, which creates this sense of hesitancy of being able to just exchange with each other. To me, it takes away from the experience, right? So going back to the first misconception of the whole idea of a person such as myself, right? Expressed an interest in BDSM spankings, or BDSM, altogether, and being perceived as a freak. Like I said, I'm automatically turned the fuck off. I'm just like, nah. One thing I do appreciate about true doms and people who really understand this dynamic, people take it seriously, right? They're not just like here for the fun of it necessarily, like the bedroom fun of it, but like this is who they are, this is their lifestyle, is that the difference between BDSM and vanilla relationships is that within the context of BDSM, like there are clear, defined rules, right? And there's conversation around those rules and expectations. So even in the comment section of that video, someone said, does she even have a safe word? Like, he was getting it in, right? And like I said, it's a very short video, but in that little short span of time that we saw this exchange of energy, if you listen closely, well, some of y'all caught it. She said, I'm coming. And she kind of tapped out, and she even tapped his arm to let him know, like, right, I've reached my climax. Now, if you also look closely to that video, she's wearing underwear. She's wearing panties. Some of y'all who are usually very reactionary and very impulsive, like in your responding to videos, like you don't take the time to really look at different content that's posted on social media. Like, you're very quick to assume, you're very quick to cast judgment. You don't really take the time to analyze a situation, to really look at it, to see, right? So it makes sense that a lot of y'all comments, some of y'all comments, right, on that video, you were coming from a place of misinformation, from disillusionment, just from lack of information, lack of understanding, to even assume that, number one, they were having actual physical intercourse, right? Like, his dick was not in her vagina. It just was not, right? What was happening there in that video is that he was giving her a spanking. It was public, which probably even heightened the sensitivity, right, or the sensuality of the experience for her, and probably even for him too, because there are, doms who definitely receive gratification from publicly humiliating their submissives, and even vice versa. There are submissives who also receive pleasure from being humiliated publicly. right? And when we throw out these terms, right, humiliation, or BDSM spankings or dominance and submission and this and that, I think like it really is important to really gain a clear understanding of what does that look like, because it can look one way for one person and a different way for another person. Such as myself, like little self-disclosure here. So I've already said that I identify myself as a submissive, right? And we're going to go, as we begin to talk about the second most common misconception of BDSM spankings, I'm going to break down some things in a psychodynamic way, right? As it relates to people's understanding. We're going to get into it, right? But it's just like, all right, let's focus. So going back to the first misconception of, being perceived as a freak. And you guys feel free to leave your comments below as we're breaking this down. But yeah, being misperceived as a freak, and especially men, it to me becomes very repulsive, where they lead with sex, right, as opposed to leading with understanding. And as I was saying, like, the one thing I really appreciate about the people who really take this dynamic seriously, especially I've experienced myself, like I actually was introduced to this lifestyle. Always kind of imagine it in my mind, but actually being able to step into it was something different, where I experienced that back in 2014. I had a master, right? This is a person who was very well-versed, very experienced, very astute, shall I say, when it comes to this relationship dynamic. And I was afforded the opportunity to be able to experience this. And we did not even have intercourse, right? But there was very clear communication. And that's what I really appreciate. Whereas in a lot of vanilla relationships, it's almost like it's assumed that a woman likes X, Y, and Z, right? And even for the men too, right? It's almost assumed that he likes X, Y, and Z. Whereas in this type of dynamic, given that it's so weird, as you guys may say, right? It's so bizarre, it's so freakish. Like, there has to be communication, right? Like, it necessitates this level of communication that oftentimes doesn't show up in your vanilla relationships, right? When we're talking about these kinks, and like I said, for myself, identifying myself as a submissive, not only that, a masochist, not only that, a person, yes, who also derives pleasure from being humiliated, but that humiliation must take the form in a certain type of way, right? Like, and of course, this is something that is discussed with my partner, right? And the thing is, it's mutual. It's a mutually agreed upon type of relationship dynamic. And I think that's where a lot of y'all get it mistaken as we begin to talk about the second most misconception relating to BDSM spankings, is that people somehow assume that a woman who has interest in this, she has been abused, she grew up being abused, she likes abuse. And that could be no further away from the truth. Now, granted, yes, if you were to do a survey or research study, right, and to see the people who identify themselves, right, as masochists, which is simply a term that describes people who derive pleasure from pain. Usually it's physical pain, could be emotional pain too. But for the most part, it's like physical pain, right? BDSM spankings such as. And not just BDSM spankings, right? The thing about BDSM, it's a whole umbrella of various kinks. And I made a whole video on the top 100 kinks within BDSM, according to FetLife, right? So you have people that not only, BDSM spankings is like the most popular type of masochism, so to speak. But then, there are people who actually derive pleasure from being set on fire. Now, that clearly is obviously very extreme, right? You have people who derive pleasure from getting their nipples clamped. Even, their clitoris clamped. Right now, me, that ain't it. That's why I say it necessitates conversation, right? And this is an ongoing conversation. It's not just something that is one and done, where, okay, in the beginning, a person may have agreed to something, but this is ongoing conversation, this is ongoing consent. Let's be clear here, right? Because what a person may start out liking, in the end, they may not enjoy any longer, right? So things can change. There are people who like being choked. Choking is also one of the kind of common, popular ways of one could, see themselves as being a masochist, right? Or enjoying like masochistic types of behavior. I just recently learned that I kind of like choking, but to a certain extent, because that happened to me, and it wasn't really a conversation around it, but it was just kind of something that organically happened, which was even more of a turn on for me than us really talking about it. And I'm just like, God damn, this shit really is a turn on. I have something else to say too as it relates to the first misconception about being a freak. Because like I was saying, that I automatically get turned off when men kind of lead with sex, right? Or lead with a misunderstanding, misconception that this is what I'm about, right? And missing me as a person, right? And I think obviously they are leading with that because that's what they are about, right? And that's what they are responding to on their lower chakra. And I get it, right? Everyone has their own thing. But for me, I automatically, like, my pussy does not get wet when it comes to conversations that kind of are jump started in talking about sex, especially like in the beginning phases, right? Now, if a man is able to control himself, right? So talking about sex in and of itself isn't necessarily a turnoff, because for me, I love it, right? And as an intellectual person, that clearly is a turn on for me. It's something that I like. It's an interest of mine. I get on here and talk about it, right? I think it's the underlying assumption that this is what motivates me, right? On a behavioral level when it comes to a relationship, right? And being in front of a man, it's just like, no, right? If you first have to understand the dynamic of it and what drives a person. And let's just go ahead and break it down. So for me, it's clearly about the power exchange. It's about knowing, and not just knowing, but feeling a sense of being dominated, right? And experiencing that. And being dominated by a man who holds this power, clearly that hasn't been bestowed upon him by myself, right? Because it is a power exchange. And in order to exchange power, that power, first of all, has to originate from somewhere, right? And the question often comes up, who really holds the power in a DS relationship? And I've said before, it clearly is the submissive, woman. Could be a man too, but traditionally, it usually is a woman, who is the submissive in obviously heterosexual relationships. And it's just like that alone, right? And I think it really takes a master, which I had the privilege of experiencing back in 2014. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia. So I lived in Atlanta from 2011 to 2014. And so near the end of my stay in Atlanta, Georgia, I was ending a 5-year relationship with my partner that was fucking dry. That I talked about this before, but the relationship was very dry. 5-year romantic. I can't even really say it was romantic, right? Believe it or not, within that span of that 5-year relationship, we only had sex one time. We were best friends, right? So let's lay the backdrop of how things kind of unfolded. We were best friends, more like a brother to me, I would say. We lived together, we went through a lot of things together. And so that relationship pretty much had run its course. And I wanted I was craving spontaneity. I was craving excitement. I was craving to be able to step into these fetishes, right? These things that I had imagined myself doing for the longest. And a person, many of you guys have asked me before, where did I get this? Where did it begin? we'll talk about that in a second. But I definitely remember like dating back to when I was a young girl. I would have these fantasies just of myself being tied up in bondage and experiencing a thorough beating by a man. And this is as a child, right? And it would make me feel so good inside. Just the fantasy of it, right? I had never had a chance to actually live it out though until 2014. And so some of you guys have come across my fictional fantasy book that I wrote, Dying to Submit. I do have excerpts posted on my website at danielleleach.com. But that story is definitely based on my own personal experience. It's written in first person, purposefully and very strategically. And that experience for me, I definitely reference, I look back on, I reflect on, I clearly value, I appreciate. And it was the template. It has set the template and the bar very high, I think, for what I do desire and what I do expect in a relationship with a man who I would consider being a submissive to, right? Or submitting to. I mean, it was like the perfect scenario, the perfect match, so to speak. And when I say he was a master, as opposed to a lot of men, you know, who respond to a woman who says she's interested in BDSM, like some of y'all be running around like little puppies, like this is your first time ever having sex. That clearly is a turn off for me, right? In order to be a master, in order to master someone else, in order to be able to dominate someone else, right? You first have to have self-control. And I think this is where a lot of people go wrong because they lack self-control, especially over their own sexual urges. And they're driven by that lower chakra, right? And so they're just falling behind like their own sexual energy, their sexual urges. They're pulling them in this direction and they're just like acting irresponsibly. I'm not attracted to men like that. It's a turn off. So I think in this video, and I've made videos like this before, but it should be very clear the type of woman I am. And it may seem like, damn, like, yeah, I have very specific tastes, very specific interests that for a lot of people may be out of reach. I think that's what it is. And clearly I have a difficult time in finding my life partner, right? Because there are just things that turn me on and there are things that just don't do it for me, right? And finding those things that turn me on in one person, I think is the biggest challenge. But yeah, this master that I had back in 2014 when I was in Atlanta, Georgia, he was very well versed, meaning that this wasn't his first rodeo. He definitely was an intellectual. He was in the same field as I'm in, like mental health. So he knew human behavior in and out, right? And a couple of things I did like about that dynamic is that it came organically for him. Like he was able to set the stage for what he wanted to see, right? So as you guys read that story, the autobiographical fictional fantasy story on my website, Danielle Leach, entitled Dying to Submit, like you guys will see, you know, some of y'all can only see like the sex and you kind of like what drives this whole interplay kind of goes over your head because you're so blinded just by. It's very explicit language, I will say that, and I didn't hold back, right? But I think you can be disillusioned by that, and you have to read between the lines to see amongst the dialogue, right? When we look at the dialogue that me and this person share, you'll see like, oh, okay, this is how it's done. This is how Right, that's the whole important thing, being able to understand the how. Some of y'all got caught up in like the what of what was actually happening, right, on the pages. And that's fine, right? Some of y'all were titillated, right? By these sex scenes that I spelled out very eloquently and tastefully, but I want people to be able to grasp, like, okay, the how of it, like the mechanism. Like, how is this person able to even get me in a position like this? And of course, it obviously requires my own proclivity towards this, my own desire. The desire was already there. He just nurtured that desire that was in me, that he saw in me and met me where I was. Right? So I'll give you, for you guys who made it this far, I'll give y'all a little bit of spoiler here. Like this is some game. Some of y'all just don't get it, but like, first of all, okay, and this might be a kind of lengthy video, and that's fine. So we're kind of leaving the first misconception related to people who enjoy BDSM spankings as us being freaks, right? Let's step kind of away from that. We'll probably come back to that. We'll kind of step away from that and going into the second misconception about the whole abuse aspect. And a lot of y'all commented saying that, oh, well, women, like abuse. Women who like BDSM spankings, they were abused. This is just what they're into. And it's just like, no. I will be the first to say that is incorrect, right? However, it's like a tightrope, right? It's a balancing act, right? It's a fine line, and the lines can get blurred, right? So, as I said before, when it comes to these very delicate types of kinks, right, there has to be some understanding and communication surrounding, first of all, what's driving us to this, and what is it that we want? And when there's understanding, then you can just organically be, right? That's the fun part. And so for people who get it. And I reference that relationship dynamic is because, like, he just understood. Like, to me, it was like amazing to see how much he understood. It's almost like he was God, heaven sent. It was like, God damn, right? Now, granted, there was some conversation, and you guys, I wish that you guys who are watching this have already read that story. All right, so you kind of understood. But there are some things that happened. For example, the setting of check-in times. All right, these are the times I want you to check in. Like that alone, it may seem kind of insignificant, but even that alone, it says so much, right? What does that say? When you think of that, like when a man in a relationship dynamic, right, where it's already been established, right, that clearly I'm a submissive and he's a dom and this is what I like, it's like he's feeding, yes, I can venture to say, he's feeding that inner child, for lack of a better word, right? Which I think a lot of women have, right? And some women are honest enough to admit that within us as women, as adult women, like there is that yearning, right? To have a daddy dom, right? Or, a person, a man who's able to take the lead and who's able to guide. And just because that desire exists does not mean we did not have a father. Anyone who knows me knows that I definitely grew up in a two-parent household, and not just to have physical parents there, but they were there emotionally. Like my dad nurtured me. If anything, I probably was spoiled, nurtured damn too much, right? If there's such a thing. And my mom definitely was a disciplinarian. And so I'm honest enough to admit that for myself, does not mean it applies to every single submissive or masochist, but for myself, I am able to make that connection to see how certain aspects of my childhood are definitely linked and have shaped the trajectory for my interest as an adult. I can see that, and I'm honest enough to admit that growing up in a household, especially in the 80s, where getting beat, that was just second nature, right? Getting discipline in the form of beatings, which my dad didn't do, but my mom definitely did, right? She took the liberty to do it. And she had her choice weapons. I've said this before. This is not new information that I've shared. However, like, she had her choice weapons, which were extension cord, cable cord, and leather belt. And anytime she felt we needed discipline, like, she would have me and my sister stripped down to our underwear. And this is prepubescent age, right? Before I even had breasts. Even through the point where I became an adolescent and developed breasts, right? So as early back as I can remember, right, my mom would beat us. And the beatings were crucial. And when I say stripped down, like butt naked, only still having on panties, that's it. All right, nothing covering chest or anything like that. And getting up from those beatings with welts, on my body, all right, across my neck, on my back, my legs, right? Thankfully not my face, but definitely my soul. It definitely had an impact on me, and I'm honest enough to admit that a lot of people, especially Black people, kind of stray away and say, we all got beat, so what? We all got spanked, but no. Now, yes, do I consider that as abuse? Yes, right? But as an adult, I've been able to come to terms and redefine and reframe, right, my childhood experience in a healthy and adaptive way, so that I'm able to, what is the frame? What is the term? Like, I'm able to sublimate, right, an experience that for me was definitely painful, definitely abusive as a child, but to sublimate that into something that for me as an adult is very rewarding. And I mean, you guys can cast your own judgment, but for myself, right, it makes a lot of sense. And I do not consider it as an adult, between two consenting adults, the person that I'm involved with, as abuse. No, because this is consent. This is something that, hey, this is just the way my body is designed. Now, the question, some of you guys who are keeping up, are able to keep up for that matter, and who have thinking minds, you may ask a question, well, had I not experienced that, would I still have this proclivity? Good question. Now, for those who are watching this, who have not experienced, let's say, childhood abuse, but you are drawn to this, right? You can speak from your own personal experience. So I think it's helpful to be able to have these kinds of conversations, just so that we can be able to come to an understanding of clarity, right? Now, within that second misconception that people often say for people who like BDSM spankings, they say, oh, well, this is abuse. Number one, they say this is abuse. Then they go to assume that a person who likes it has been abused, right? And then they like to be abused. So that's three parts, right? This is abuse, the very act of being beaten or spanked, right? This is abuse, or choked, or what have you, right? This is abuse. This person has been abused, and then they like being abused. Let's clear that up right here and there, because I'm reading these comments in response to that very short clip where this public display of ecstasy, really, and just sexual exchange of understanding, right? To me, I'm looking at it like, wow. And anybody who gets it is just like, oh my gosh, this could be the greatest Christmas gift, right? But I'm reading some of those comments and I'm just like, I'm really offended, because I'm just like, I don't like being abused. Have I been abused? Yes. Not only as a child, but definitely as an adult. And I'll speak from personal experience. So my very last serious long-term dating relationship, was from 2014. So I moved to New York City from Atlanta in 2014, and I fell in love. I met this person, and we dated for 3 years, and it was going well when it was going well, right? He was naturally a Dom, right? His ethnic origin, his ethnic identity, Jamaican, born in Brooklyn, but he was a first generation, so his parents were born in Jamaica, the country. And so if you have a cultural understanding of, certain ethnic groups, you know that within certain ethnic groups, it's natural. It's common for the man just to take the lead. It just comes natural. You don't have to be taught this. You ain't got to take no special workshop or nothing like that. This is just something. So it was almost like a match too, also made in heaven. And he, when we first met, definitely expressed curiosity. So, in getting to know me, know what I like. And of course, I had shared with him, obviously, my interest in BDSM. He got the opportunity to read my autobiography, a draft of it, which has not been published yet, but he got a chance to read my autobiography, as well as my autobiographical fictional fantasy story, Dying to Submit. And yeah, he was intrigued, to say the least, right? Especially with the Dying to Submit. Very intrigued. And I say this to say that, as I said before, there is this fine line where the lines can get blurred when it comes to this dynamic here, right? Now, obviously, there is ongoing consent, but for a person, I think, who presents himself, right, for a dominant man, whether natural dom or if he's just pretending to be, he's a performative dom, let's say in the bedroom, what have you, I think like there's always that kind of margin of error, so to speak. There's always that space of opportunity for a person who is in a position really of power, right? There is a power exchange, right? And sometimes that like it could be, okay, it's on a gradient. So, it is really in the control of the woman, the submissive, such as myself, right? To be able to taper how much power she wants to exchange, right? Starting out with a little bit. It could be 5%, let's say, if we had to quantify it. 20%, 25%, depending on, obviously, this is contingent upon the degree of trust and comfortability she has in that relationship. So for a woman who, first of all, is misperceived, which I have been, misunderstood in like the beginning phases, like in the dating phases, right? You ain't getting no goddamn power, clearly, right? And I think this is where the frustration of a lot of men who have come across is like, wait, well, you're dating before you said you're submissive. I hold your horses, honey. Hold your horses, right? It's just not given to you just because, you're a man or you call yourself a dom. And this here experience that I'm sharing with you guys isn't something that I experienced independently, on my own. Of course, I'm aware that other women can relate. I've shared this story. They shared their stories, and that's a thing that oftentimes submissive women experience, unfortunately, right? Men just don't get it, right? They assume that, yes, this is an alternative sexual relational type of dynamic. It's different, right, than your typical vanilla, but they assume that the same underlying characteristics that make up a healthy relationship, right, that constitute the beginning phases of being able to build a new relationship, they assume that does not apply. That it doesn't apply to people who practice BDSM somehow, because in their mind, going along with the second misconception is that they think we're animals, we like to be abused, like we deserve mistreatment. The list goes on. And like I say, you can be further away from the freaking truth. That's why you got to be careful, right? And there are some risk factors. There are some, danger warning signs, right? There are some things that a person needs to avoid, that you need to be mindful of in getting involved in this type of relationship, right? It's not something that you take lightly. It's not, right? This is something very seriously, and that's why it should be contingent upon having an established degree of trust with your partner, right? And I understand why for me it's difficult, right, to get to that point, because, a lot of men are moving from their lower chakra and they're just acting just out of their own, sexual interests. I get it, to each his own. I'm not here to judge. I've never been a person to judge anyone for what they're into, right? The last person to judge. But it's just not what I'm into, right? I don't move like that. And there's this disconnect. There's just a misunderstanding there, right? So it has to be a level of maturity, which, like I said, the master that I had, he was there. Very mature, very experienced. And so going back to the second misconception, where you have people, clearly y'all, even from the general public, who assume that a person that is into BDSM spankings, and accepts this, right? It's not that, they accept it. It's like they want it. This is something that they asked for. You think this woman on that stage, this is a whole staged event, right? But they actually are performing in front of people for other people's gratification. So that's a whole nother key, right? And being a voyeur, watching a person gain pleasure, right? That then gives the voyeur pleasure. And some of y'all watching it, you're like, oh my gosh. But meanwhile, subconsciously, you're getting pleased, right? So I think this is already to things like this, right, that obviously show up on social media, because some of y'all is like, this is so distasteful, to the point that you just can't click off the video. It's so distasteful. You're so repulsed at watching a woman get thoroughly spanked, really beaten by a man publicly, that you just have a difficult time clicking up. And it's just like, okay, I feel like people are responding from their own programming. So we are all socially programmed to adhere and conform to societal norms, so to speak, right? What society thinks we should do, right? And this can be based on religion, which often is. A lot of y'all, practice Christianity. And you're just like, okay, well, my Jesus daddy tells me, I can't do this is wrong, and whatever. Listen, I'm not here to judge. But I'm just saying, your comments, I understand, are coming from a place of programming, right? But then you're still there, you're engaging. Before you know it, like, you're getting turned on subconsciously. That's why you're still there. That's why you keep coming back. And I even seen a comment where a person said, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. How do I report this? How do I block this? I'm like, let's not act ignorant here. Let's not act like you don't know how to remove yourself from unwanted situations that you don't want to be, right? Like, I find that shit so hilarious when people, because obviously, like, this is social media, so there's going to be a range of different types of content. Yes, you may somehow stumble across. You stumble across it on your feed, it's fed to you, and that's a whole nother topic, right? And how did this end up on your timeline? Right? Talk about psychology of BDSM spanking. Let's talk about psychology of social media content, and how somehow mysteriously you are being fed this on your timeline. And we know how algorithms are set up. We know the mechanics. Well, some of y'all may not know, right? But we should know by now that the things that you're seeing across your timeline are there for a reason. It's because you have expressed interest in something that relates to this, that closely resembles this, right? I just find, it's not just Facebook, but I've seen that on YouTube. How did I end up here? Like on Coco, how did I end up here? Recommended videos. It relates to things that you have shown interest in. And let's say, perhaps there was a mistake. Fine. Then there's a way for you to be able to control what you see on your feed, right? And even above that, if you don't like, especially on Facebook, if you just like absolutely abhor the content, right? For example, that I've shared, you can block. So I went to myself, right? I took it upon my own self to block this person. It was like, oh my gosh, how do I block this guy? Like, let me help you out. I'll block it for you. But I find it interesting how people somehow become these helpless people on social media. They're all like somehow helpless now. They don't know how to find the block button or to click off certain types of content. So I know we have discussed a lot here, right? As it relates to the psychological underpinnings of BDSM spankings. But for myself, yes. I would like to say, and I have said this very confidently, unapologetically, that I, do come from a place of being beaten. To the point where, yes, it was abusive, right? Even to the point where in the summertime, like, from these beatings, my mom would have us wear turtlenecks. Like, it's hot as fuck, wearing turtlenecks to school, right? To cover up the welts. And she would say, well, I dare you to call the white man. I dare you. Go ahead and call them. Here, let me give you the number. Call them. I want you to call CPS so they can come and pick your ass up and do you worse than what I did you. So it was, clearly it was abusive, right? I know my family, my immediate family, they don't like when I do this. They don't like, when I talk about these things. In the manner that I do, they just don't like it. They feel like from your traditional Black household, like what goes on in this house stays on in this house. Fuck all of that, right? I am not of that school of thought. But yeah, this is just something that I like. This is something that I have been wired to gain pleasure from. And I don't feel ashamed, even though clearly a lot of you guys have come on here, women especially, like, oh my God, they try to make you feel, listen, this is the first. This is not the first ridicule that I have experienced from me expressing my interest in BDSM spankings. In fact, when I started my doctoral program out in Los Angeles, California back in 2016, you do introductions, right? And I share certain things. People share, students share like, oh, I'm a vlogger, I'm a writer. And I felt like, I did think about that before I said, I'm like, wait a minute, should I even, what does it matter? I'm not here to advertise. I don't need the advertisement, right? I'm clearly known on social media in spaces that I've been known in, right? And it's just like, I don't feel the need to advertise anything about myself. Like, if people find out, they find out. But in discussing in class, oh, what do you like to do, right? We're getting to know each other. I'm a writer. Why should I feel ashamed? I write BDSM. Not only that, like, I write nonfiction too. And of course, it made people curious and they searched. My other colleagues, students in the class, they searched me. They found my website. And I'm in a predominantly white institution where I am a racial minority. And these are white, for lack of a better expression, jealous bitches. I hate to say it, but that's just what it is. They call themselves reporting me, right? Like Karens, like the Karens that they are. And they go to administration of my school. They report me. Of course, I'm called in to talk to the administrators, and they're just like, well, it's been brought to our attention that you have a website. Okay, I have a website. I'm a freaking author. I'm a writer. Right? And they saw what was there on the website. Oh, it's explicit. So I don't care. I never care. Listen, I accept me. I am who I am. You think I give two shits about what some person thinks of me? I really don't. I feel like that's a you issue. That's not a me issue, right? And this is why I get on here and I definitely promote sex positivity, right? And beyond that, just accepting who you are in all aspects of what make up who you are. Whether it be your sexual orientation, whether it be your race, especially, me as a Pan-African woman, above all, I am unapologetically who I am, whether you like it or not, right? And I've definitely clearly expressed that in my program. And so it came down to my advisor at the time, who then became my dissertation chair. She said, well, you know what? We're not telling you to take anything off your website, whatever. We just let you know that this has been brought to our attention. And my concern is, I wonder how these two identities conflict with each other, right? You're trained to become a clinical psychologist. Meanwhile, you have this identity over here. I'm like, I don't see them conflicting. She framed it in that way, but I'm like, they're not conflicting identities. If anything, they're parallel to each. Like, you're talking about who the fuck I am, but you're saying there's a conflict there. And I get it. There could be a conflict of interest on y'all behalf, but listen, I am not the only unique, dynamic individual. We're all unique and dynamic, right? And I feel like there are other aspects of the other students' identities that they probably did, that wasn't revealed, shall I say, right? But it's there, right? And funny enough, like there are other students in the program who had a history of fucking using heroin. Oh, but we're not going to talk about that history and those. We're not going to go there. We're not going to touch upon that. But anyway, so yeah, that was annoying. And it brings me full circle even to a recent exchange that I had at the hospital where I work here in New York City, where one of my patients, he is a writer himself. He is hospitalized because he murdered a couple of people. He's a forensic patient. So he has been hospitalized for a significant amount of his adult life. But he is an artist, right? He's a poet. He wrote some poems where he shared in his music therapy group. And his music therapist, who just so happens to be a white woman, and he just so happens to be a black man, I feel like that's enough said right there, right? Looking at that dynamic and those constructs of him being a black man and juxtaposed against a white woman, right? His music instructor, I guess he felt comfortable, right? Was he taking a risk? Could have been, but I felt like more so he felt comfortable to share parts of him, right? We talk about artists here, whether your art is painting, which I've taken to over the time of the pandemic, right? It's painting, it's drawing, it's writing, right? Whatever, dance, whatever it is, right? People have different ways and methods of expressing themselves, and the person should not be shunned for that. But it's like he shared with her some of his writings, which contained some type of, I would say it was more, I wouldn't say it's explicit, but funny enough, of course, white people, the way they look at black people, we already know it's a bias there, right? We already know. And they usually perceive danger when there isn't danger. They perceive threat when there is no, just our skin color is a threat to them, right? So that becomes an issue. But I think it was more mild. Like it was it was kind of semi, it wasn't even explicit. I would call it semi romantic writings in nature. And she made a big to-do about it. She emailed the entire team and she's just like, I wanted to bring it to your attention, blah, blah, blah. And it just goes to show, right, in alignment with what I'm saying here, it's just like, it's unfortunate how there is so much shaming, right? And there's so much misunderstanding. And for me, as a psychoanalytic oriented type of psychoanalytic oriented type of therapist, I would have used that as an opportunity to explore a little deeper, right? More so than, because who's to say that he wrote that for her, right? But she's looking at like, oh well, he's like coming on to me, and his romantic, very semi in nature, like type of writings. She felt offended essentially, and so of course that then raises a concern, which kind of disrupts his course of treatment, right? This is court mandated, mind you, right? This is a state psychiatric facility. So these people are mandated, really, to be there. Not that they really just hanging out, want to be there. Some do. Some kind of stick around because they have nowhere else to go. But for a lot of people, like, a lot of them, they don't want to be there. They're court. They're mandated by the courts. And so, like, this then disrupts his course of treatment, creates a whole other issue. So, all for nothing. Really, right? Something that could have really been explored, and just a boundary set saying, no, thank you. I mean, granted, like, my first day at the hospital, I was touched. I was touched. And I find it funny, the bias, what people don't even notice their own fucking bias that they have. But it's just like, here you have a patient that touched my fucking breast, right? But then they try to excuse and say, oh, well, that's what he does, right? He just initiates all women. But then you have the patient that physically touch women who come to the ward initially, right? That he initially meets. He serenades them by touching their freaking body parts. I was touching my breast, right? Violated, essentially. But then they dismiss it and say, oh, that's what he does. He does that. Granted, he is Asian. I'll leave it at that. He's Asian. White, essentially white Asian, not black Asian. He's a white Asian man. But that's just kind of brushed underneath the rug. Meanwhile, a black man shares some of his romantic, semi-romantic poetry with his music instructor, who, by the way, plays freaking love songs on her guitar, singing to black men. Most of the people there, most of the patients there represent black race, unfortunately. Overrepresented, obviously, in these institutions. But she sings to them, knowing that they are deprived of freaking sex and sexual, contact and exchange with a woman, right? Whatever, right? So maybe he felt invited, maybe he felt comfortable to share, like, here, this is who I am. You're sharing with me parts of yourself, right? He got to see aspects of her through her guitar playing music, and then he's sharing certain, ideas that he's had and through his writings. But then he is put on the do not return list, right? Whatever. But it goes to show the level of bias and how, for some groups of people, things that have been perceived to be displayed by black people as bad and egregious when it's on the other foot and done by a white person, non-black person, shall I say, it's taken lightly, or, it's brushed underneath the rug. So I call bullshit. That's all I can say. My eyes are well wide open. I see through all the bullshit. But going back to the second one, I just had to share that there, because clearly there's bias and there's misunderstanding, there's judgment when it comes to certain things for certain people. But do people such as myself, women who like BDSM spankings, does that mean that we like to be abused? Absolutely no. And like I was saying, painting the experience with my last partner who I was with from 2014 to 2017, it definitely bordered on the line of abuse, and he did become abusive. I think not so much to say, oh, it was because, of this dynamic where I had expressed to him clearly that I am into BDSM. Who was ringing my freaking doorbell? Amazon, I didn't order anything, but I hate when they do that in my building. And so I think irrespective of my having expressed this as an interest, that's just who he is anyway, right? Some people, they are abusive people. And I did experience that. Now, I will say that within that relationship, though, I did get a chance to obviously experience some really good BDSM spankings that were consensual, right? And funny enough, interesting enough, though, the way the abuse manifests itself, it was never in the form of something that I mutually agreed upon, right? In that type of expression. So I like BDSM. I like spankings, right? I like discipline spankings in particular, meaning that within a context of a DS relationship, right, there are obviously agreed upon rules, expectations within that power exchange. And if, the submissive kind of violates or doesn't adhere to those things, then she is disciplined. Right, she gets, and y'all have to read my book, Dying to Submit. I did post excerpts on my website at danielleash.com. But she is, disciplined. And it's all, mutually agreed upon in terms of how this discipline takes shape, takes form. And I find it interesting, though, how even in that relationship, though I wouldn't say it was discipline spankings, it was just more so spankings. I wasn't ever disciplined. Like, we didn't really engage in that because I don't think he really quite understood the whole BDSM thing. But he was giving me what I wanted, right? Which was essentially to be spanked. And so, oh my gosh, I loved it because I think he was more afraid of hurting me than I was afraid of being hurt in that experience. And so this is relating to my my last intimate partner, and I'm recalling a spanking that he gave me, and it's just like he, in terms of going beyond that threshold of pain, he was very careful not to go beyond that threshold. Whereas myself, I had to usher him, like, keep going, go harder, right? And he kind of loved it. He liked it. And I think, yes, this is where it gets tricky, because for people who are abusive, like they have that abusive characteristic within them, yes, they themselves also derive pleasure from administering pain. And more importantly, experiencing that exchange of power. And anyone who understands of the abuse cycle understands like what really drives abusive behavior is really about the power that people gain. Oftentimes people who administer abuse or essentially are abusive. And let's draw that distinguishing characteristic. Let's make it clear that abuse, number one, happens between non-consenting people. These people, a person who is being, didn't consent to this shit, right? Like, no, they're not in on it. That's the difference. Versus a woman such as myself, who engages in these BDSM spankings, right? This is something I want. It's something I welcome, right? From my partner. It's consensual. That's the defining characteristic, right? If any of you guys were confused about, because I saw a comment even today before I went live here, this guy was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm confused. Now all of a sudden women want to be abused now in response to the video clip. Do you understand what abuse is, right? I get it. It can get tricky and the lines can get blurred. And so, yeah, thinking about like that particular experience, right, where he was very calculated as to not exceed that threshold of pain. Where for me, I had to usher him. And, you know, he definitely derived pleasure from it because for him, he's, you know, obviously in full power. Like, one had to measure how much power he had over me. I would say 100% at that time. Right. And then, you know, it did affect, I think, our relationship dynamic in a sense where he took it at liberty for himself. Right. So he felt emboldened in a sense like, oh, you know, she's giving me power. I'm powerful. Right. In a kind of sense that I own her kind of thing. And for me, it was a balancing act. Like I actually appreciated certain aspects. Right? Like, first of all, he took the lead, just dominant naturally in that relationship. And the lead in the sense that making decisions. For me, that is a turn on. Like, nothing turns me off and annoys me more than a man who lacks a sense of direction as it shows up in just choosing where to eat for the first date, right? Not that I don't have an input. I don't have a freaking mind of my own to be able to decide what I want to eat, but it's just like, yeah, a man just being able to set that course, right? And be able to plan a date independent of myself. That to me is a turn on. He did not want me paying any bills, which I was in agreement because I feel like a man, if you're going to call yourself a man, you should be able to provide. Right? Now, not to say that I can't work, not to say that I don't have income. Of course, I did have income. I've always had income. But in terms of the expectation to contribute to the finances, right? To contribute to the bills, essentially, in the household, it was not there. I was not expected to, right? And therein lies the difference. Because I think some men get it twisted, right? They have this contorted understanding of what it means, you know, to be a man and the contribution of a woman in that relationship. And a lot of men nowadays do expect a woman to contribute 50-50, which I feel like is the shitty end of the stick. I think it's a bad deal. I'll say this for this reason is that, especially if you're talking about a relationship where you're procreating, right? A woman, her body is a vessel for life to come through, right? And unless you are a woman, you just really don't fully understand what does that mean. And the toll of being pregnant and giving birth it takes on a woman. That's a job in and of itself, right? Then on top of that, they have men that expect a woman to also work, to also provide. It's just like, no. It's one thing if a woman chooses to if she wants to, but to have that underlying expectation that she has to, just like, wait, are we roommates here? I'm not looking for a roommate. I'm looking for a man, a provider, and not that he has to provide for me. I can do that I've been doing that for myself, right? Is that he wants to do this. Therein lies a difference, okay? And yes, I think that's where the lines can also get blurred in the sense that I say men because I'm heterosexual, right? For men who are abusive, they play upon that power exchange, that dynamic where, you know, them saying, okay, I don't want you to contribute to the finances in the sense that, hell, they damn near run the show. And so they can call the shots and they can do it discriminately in a way that a woman does get the short end of that stick, right? And it can become abusive. And it did. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but I endured a lot of shit in that relationship, which I think also is the reason why I'm very calculated and very careful as it relates to stepping into another relationship. Because I know that aspect of myself is there. It's always going to be there. It's not going anywhere. Now, when I was completing my doctoral studies out in Los Angeles, we all are required as doctoral students of psychology who are trained to become licensed psychologists. We all are expected to undergo our own individual therapy with a licensed psychologist, right? Makes sense. And so for me, I chose a psychoanalyst, and I think her focus and her work with me was to kind of tap into that aspect, which was good. It worked out, right? Where, she knew I didn't hold back, my interest in BDSM. And so she said something very poignant, and I referenced this in other videos where she was like, oh, so you want to exchange your submission for a man taking care of you. And she gave me the look like, and at the time, I was so offended. I was just like, this bitch? You got it all wrong. See, that's the problem. People who are vanilla, you're misinterpreting people like myself who practice BDSM, and this is a lifestyle. Like, you just don't get it. And I just feel like we were misaligned. But then, like, I always go back to that because that therapy relationship had such a detrimental impact on myself in many different ways. Number one, it gave me a greater appreciation for the gift of submission. Didn't take away that aspect of me just being a submissive and wanting to submit. That's just how I show up in my dating relationships. That's just how it is. So it didn't remove that aspect of myself, but it definitely gave me a greater appreciation for that. Not that I didn't already appreciate that, but it goes to show, like, listen, even guard it more so with your life, right? This gift of submission. And I've done that. I think I've been very successful at doing that. Hence, probably the reason why I'm single. Because, listen, no man ain't really get my submission. Like, you really have to measure up and damn near be perfect. I know no one is perfect, but every aspect, your ass got to be on point, and there has to be a natural, organic chemistry between us. And you just have to be naturally, masculine, have God-like energy, yeah, conscious and all the sorts, right? So just, I haven't found that kind of package all into one man. Just, I've had certain kind of resemblances of such, but not, all together. So that's a whole nother thing. But definitely a greater appreciation for my gift of submission, because understanding is not something that is just guaranteed. Like, oh, it's just we're dating, you get this, right? The reason why I always say, I'll go back. The reason why I got offended, because I felt like it's not really an exchange. I'm not giving you submission for you to take care of me. You taking care of me is an expectation, right? It's not an exchange of, okay, you do this for me, I do this for you. Hell the fuck no, but that's how she interpreted it. And I'm just like, with her interpreting it, misinterpreting, shall I say, it that way, it created a space for me to go back and reflect, right? Because she rubbed me the wrong way. So of course, like, there was a surge of emotions that got triggered in me, right? Which creates reflection. Any therapist knows this. So I reflected very deeply about this, and I made videos even right after talking about, wait a minute, my therapist wants me to quit BDSM. I made a whole video. You guys go check that out. It's from years ago. Entitled, my therapist wants me to quit BDSM. I'm like, hold the fuck up, man. But I'm always self-reflecting, and I think that, obviously shows a sign of strength and a sign of me having insight and knowing myself. I know myself in and out. So no person, especially no man, can tell me something about myself that I don't already know. Now, that would be interesting. If he is able to do that, I'm like, hold on, let me see something that I didn't quite see there. Huh. Interesting. All right, so looking at those three parts, right, related to the second misconception of, why a woman is attracted to BDSM spankings or wants to, be beaten. It's just like, oh, she has a history of abuse. She likes abuse. No, absolutely no. For me, yes, I do have a history of abuse, but do I like being abused? Absolutely no. And saying that, and it is it in and of itself, right? In the act of being disciplined with spankings, that is abusive. Absolutely no, it's not. It's a consensual act. Now, going to the third misconception is, I kind of touched on the surface of this earlier is that people assume that a woman who is drawn to this type of relationship dynamic and power exchange, she is searching for a father figure, or she didn't have a father figure, or what have you. And I'm like, that is not true. Like I said, anyone who knows me know that I grew up with my father. My father is still present. He's 82 years old. He's still hanging in there. He actually called me yesterday. Like, we have this inseparable relationship. And I think for some of my family, sometimes they are like shocked. They have been shocked. They're like, how do you, like, why is there such a bond between you and your dad? Like, it's almost like they hate him, but like, why y'all hate my, like, get the fuck out of my dad. Like, I have this understanding with my dad. And I get it, you know, for me, and especially as an adult in more recent years, you know, getting to understand my dad on a deeper level than what I had, you know, previously, and seeing, you know, how he grew up as a child, how he was raised by only his, you know, his grandmother. His mother didn't raise him. She was out in the streets doing all X, Y, and Z, right? And so, I guess it created, obviously, a sense, it created this person in my dad that kind of was forced to just navigate life independently, you know, as a little boy growing up. And just, yeah, he knows independence like the back of his hand, and he kind of instilled that in me. And so for my siblings, who I share the same father with, right? Because I am my only child, the only child that my mother and my dad put together. They only had me together, right? But prior to me, my dad already had, 6 children? I'm the 7th child of my dad. He had 6 children from his first wife. And then he had me from his second wife. And so with that, like, my other siblings, like, they have a different kind of understanding of my dad, because that was a whole other situation, as I said, for another day. But he's always had this thing where once you turn 18, like, you should already have your shit together and be out the house. And that's just something, you know, like I said, like, it was kind of inbred within him, so he kind of put that in us. And I got it, but they didn't. And they took it, I think, in a negative way. Like, okay, they were being kicked out the house and they didn't have anywhere to go. And my sister told me some things that ensued from that. But for me, like, I wanted to fucking be out. Like, I'm just like, listen, I feel like for me, I took being an adult, like, facing adulthood for me, turning 18 years old, I welcomed it. Like, I was like at it full speed ahead. Like, I'm ready to get out, you know? So I didn't see it as a bad thing. If anything, I appreciated looking back, like, okay, it definitely taught me independence, a sense of autonomy. I know how to take care of myself. I've been on my own since the age of 18 years old. I just know how to navigate the world. He's always taught me self-sufficiency. He always said, like, is there anything that you know how to do yourself, which you should increase the number of things that you know how to do yourself independently, so that if you know how to do it yourself, right? Don't get anybody else to do it. He's just like, that's something he's always taught me. And I've always appreciated that. I've always had my dad active in my life, right? He bought me my second car, paid for it in full. We've always had this, you know, understanding, this relationship. I could talk to my dad about things that I couldn't even talk to my mom about because she was so strict and that disciplinarian in the household, even as a child growing up, even after, right? Some of y'all don't know that at the age of 16 years old, I ran away from my mother's house to live with my father. And yes, my mom and my dad did separate when I was 12 years old. So from 12 to 16 years old, actually, I didn't live in my dad's household, but we still maintained contact with each other. I would go visit. We were only like a half hour apart. My mom living in St. Augustine, my dad living in Jacksonville, Florida. So with that, yes, there was that separation. So if a person could kind of want to maybe stretch things, they may say, okay, well, your dad, you know, there was kind of like a void there between those years, right? And so perhaps you crave that in a man and you want him to be your father, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, this yearning was there even before then, though, right? This yearning for me to be tied up, right? To be dominated. Like, I remember as early as elementary school age, I had this craving. So how do you explain that? I definitely wasn't watching no porn. I didn't start watching porn until like high school age. I wasn't watching porn in elementary. So like, where did, like, a lot of people will try to explain to say, oh, well, even as it relates to cuckolding, right? They will say, like, it's because their exposure to what they see in porn. This is the reason why white men, want black men as bulls to fuck their wives. They see it in porn. It's like, okay, that could be one explanation, but no, it doesn't explain everything, right? And I've always said that even to that scenario, it's still something inherent within a person that makes them even click on a particular video. Why that video when there are so many different other subcategories of other videos on these porn sites? Like, why that particular niche, right? It's something inherent within you. So tapping into, where did this come from, right? And for me, it's primal. It is primal, irrespective of anything that I experienced in my childhood, right? Throughout my development, growing up, I think it's just a primal instinct. It's a primal proclivity to want to be dominated by a man, want to be guided by the masculine energy, appreciating discipline from my male partner in the form of spankings, right? In the form of structured energy, right? That he expresses towards me to show that he is in charge, right? To show that he cares. And it's not to the extent of me being abused, right? If I am putting up a barrier there, right? If I am saying no or stop or I don't want this, right? Anything beyond that then becomes abusive. So let's be clear on that. But yes, that is what I like. That is what I will forever like. And I think that I've made it clear, I should have in this video. I'm sure this video is over. I'm sure it's well over an hour and a half, but let's just see. Yeah, hour and 37 minutes. So not too bad. I was thinking like 2 hours. It feels like I've been talking for 2 hours. But yeah, I think that I have made myself clear here in this video relating to why I am drawn to this. And I do believe that it is something inherent within me. Like I said, I think it's something primal that I like, that I'm always going to like. It's just something that gets my gears turning. And in that short video clip that you guys saw that I posted on my page with a woman getting spanked publicly, and if you listen carefully, right, you can hear her say, I'm coming, I'm coming. Yes, a spanking can make a woman come. And this is what gets me seeing y'all reaction, because y'all are so wow, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that women could come from these types of things. Inching, what does that mean? Money is coming my way. Money's always coming my way. But it's just like, that goes to show how remiss you guys are. Like, how far removed you guys are from the whole breadth of the sexual experience, and how it is so multifaceted, and you guys are so ignorant and misinformed and uninformed. Like, you don't really know, as men who are watching this, you don't really know a woman's body like you think you do, right? It's not just the physicality of it, but it's her mind. It's her spirit. It's her soul. It's her emotions. It's everything that makes up who she is. And you only know a smidget of that. When you think you know, you don't even know. You assume that every woman likes to be eaten out, right? Like likes oral sex. For you to have your tongue down there. And funny enough, I don't even like oral sex. There are other women I'm sure don't like oral sex. But y'all come with these assumptions. This is the reason why people need to come to understanding. And y'all need to be educated. This is the reason why I came here and did this video here for you guys to gain that understanding. Right? There are women who don't like giving oral sex, including myself. I ain't sucking no dick. Right? There are other things that I do and my partner does so we can please each other, and it fits together like a glove. There are men who don't necessarily need that. You know, there are men who gain pleasure from doing the very things that give me pleasure. Tying me up, giving me spankings, choking me, just that actual power exchange, just seeing that play out. Physical intercourse removed from that, right? In terms of penetrative sex, like that doesn't even have to be a factor in it, you know, for an orgasm to take place. In fact, I'm not in this video, but in fact, a lot of women will tell you they've never experienced an orgasm from intercourse, from self-pleasuring their clitoral part of themselves, right? The clitoris. Yes, but not from intercourse with a man. Penetrative sex, they've never experienced an orgasm. And I will even go on to say that I've had orgasms without contact, physical contact with a man, with and without, minus penetration with a man. Because it was all a mind fuck, It's a complete mind orgasm that stimulates and reverberates throughout my body. It starts in the mind. And I think real masters, right, men, I've said this before, who get it, they know how to make a woman come without even laying finger. I mean, it's just certain things they can say to a woman, and her pussy is just leaking, And don't even have to be in her presence. That is a true masculine man. That's a real dom right there. And a lot of y'all have not reached that point, right? Because you think it's all about the rough sex, right? And you think it's just all about just getting your nut off. But you have no idea what it takes to please a woman. And every woman is different. What works for her may not work for me, and vice versa. So on that note, I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion topic here. And I want you guys to think very critically about what I share here in this video. How does it relate to your life? How does it apply to your own interactions with men or women? And you can do this in the form of self-reflection. But also, if you feel so emboldened to do, feel free to share your comments below. Share this video, and I'll catch you all in the next one.